One of the most difficult parts of retirement planning is deciding when to take Social Security. Even most financial advisors are still split on this issue. Some sit firmly in the camp that you should take it as early as you can, close to age 62 or when you retire. Some believe that it's generally best to wait closer to full retirement age at age 67 or even as late as age 70. Today, I want to give a little bit different of a perspective on when you should be taking Social Security. The issue that most people run into when trying to compare Social Security and their retirement portfolio is that you're comparing apples to oranges. One is an asset, your retirement portfolio, that has to be turned into an income stream in retirement. One is already an income stream, Social Security, which is in itself an annuity. Let's go ahead and look at our first graphic to hopefully break this down a little bit more. Here we're going to compare a portfolio, specifically a $1 million portfolio that's invested in market-based securities, to an annuity, a $50,000 annuity. These two things should be roughly equal, although they're different products, different uses, and really equal maybe is not the best way to compare them. The portfolio, which is $1 million, could be turned into the annuity, which is $50,000. Generally, you can create anywhere from 4 to 6% income from your portfolio, whether that's through an actual annuity on the marketplace, or if that's just taking a safe withdrawal rate from your portfolio of anywhere from 4 to 6%. Let's look at the portfolio side first. What I'm demonstrating here is that with that $1 million portfolio, if it's invested, you're hopefully getting somewhere between 5 and 8% growth on average, depending on how you're invested, of course. That 7% on average growth, let's use for this example, would take your $1 million portfolio and in 1 year later, make it $1,070,000. Let's look at 7% growth on an annuity of the payment specifically. If you're receiving $50,000 a year from an annuity, and those payments per year grow by 7%, then you'd be receiving $53,500. Here's the important thing to notice. The $50,000 annuity is 5% of the $1 million portfolio, right around where you can usually expect an annuity to fall. The $53,500 is still 5% of the $1,070,000. What this means is that 7% growth of a portfolio and 7% growth of an annuity are roughly equivalent. Again, they're different vehicles used for different things, but if your portfolio grows by 7%, you'd expect the annuitized value to grow by 7% as well. And this is going to be important for our next slide when we look at how much the Social Security benefits actually grow each year relative to your age, of course. So let's look at that now. Here are the increases in Social Security benefit per year. This is a little bit different than from what folks will usually see. This is showing the year-over-year increase in monthly benefits if you're delaying your claim. So for example, we have the ages on the bottom of the chart. We see 62, 63, 64, and so forth and so on. And then in the red above is the growth year to year of the benefit. So for example, from age 62 to age 63, we see the monthly benefit would grow by roughly 7.14%. A couple of nuances to be aware of is that these benefits actually grow monthly, not annually, but I wanted to, again, compare it to the portfolio, which I think annual is a little bit more familiar for most folks. So we're looking at 62 to age 63, you would expect your monthly Social Security benefit to be grown by 7.14%. Really increased is probably a better word to use here, but again, I'm trying to compare a portfolio to Social Security benefits because the end goal for each of those things is to create income, whether that's on regular intervals like Social Security or an annuity, or if that's ad hoc whenever you need income, like what you can often do with a portfolio. It's important to try to compare apples to apples, even if there's not a super clean way to do it, because that allows you to determine when's the best time to take Social Security for myself. If we look across all the ages, 62 all the way up to age 70, we'll find that the increase in Social Security benefits is roughly 7.5%, closer to 7.4% per year. That's important to know because that's right in the range where you would expect your portfolio to be growing. I would argue maybe slightly above where you'd expect your portfolio to be growing in retirement. It's not unreasonable to expect 5, 6, 7, maybe 7.5% growth from a portfolio in retirement. A lot of that really has to do with when you retire as well, whether you're retiring into a decade that is good for returns and good for the market versus maybe one that's not as good for the market. I also have a couple of bullet points down at the bottom of reasons that it's generally good to take earlier, closer to age 62, and reasons it's generally good to take later, closer to 67 or 70. A couple of caveats that we always tell clients is that there are not very many scenarios where it's good to take Social Security while you're still working and under 67 years old. Reasons for that we'll do in another video, but just know earlier we're usually referring to done working or over 67 years old, whichever comes first. So let's look at those reasons that it's generally good to take Social Security earlier. One is that you have high confidence in the markets. When we're looking at the opportunity cost of starting Social Security early to produce that income that we need versus taking from our portfolio and delaying Social Security, again, we already determined that the increases in your Social Security benefit are going to be roughly equivalent to the increases in your portfolio, again, depending on your plan and your specific situation. If you have high confidence in the markets and believe that your portfolio is going to grow closer to that 7.5, maybe even more, or maybe just close to it, then that's a reason to leave your portfolio alone. Don't take the income from that, but instead take Social Security a little bit earlier and take income from that instead. Another thing that's important if you're going to take earlier is that you're willing to take on that risk because, again, instead of allowing your Social Security benefit to grow, that income stream to grow, you're allowing your portfolio to grow, which is inherently more risky, I would say, than Social Security or allowing that to increase. Another important consideration is if you have more investments than you figure that you'll need in retirement. If you're someone that's been very successful and you have a very, very large nest egg going into retirement, it may not be a bad idea to take those Social Security payments earlier and invest those into your portfolio. If you don't need the income down the road, the portfolio growing is likely more valuable because that's something that can then be passed on to heirs after you pass away. If you're someone that expects to have a shorter life expectancy, that's another reason that might be better to take earlier. If your family has a history of only living into their early 70s or maybe even late 70s, that often is a reason to take earlier because if you think about it, if you wait till 69, 70 to take your benefit, you get all of those increases, your monthly benefit is larger, but then you don't receive it long enough to actually make up for missing out on 6, 7 years, 8 years of not taking the benefit. The last one is if you prefer liquidity and flexibility. Again, the portfolio is going to be a lot more flexible and a lot more liquid than the Social Security will be. So if you're going to put more stock in the Social Security and delay that, then you're going to have a lot more rigidity, especially later in retirement when your income stream is more fixed because you've used up a lot of that portfolio early on to create your income earlier in retirement. Now let's move on to reasons to generally take Social Security later, closer to that 67 full retirement age, or maybe even 70 years old. If you have low confidence in the markets, meaning that you don't think the stock market is going to perform well in the first or second decade of your retirement, that could be a reason to delay Social Security. Because again, the later portions of your retirement will be made up with Social Security and annuity, which is a little bit more reliable, more consistent than a market portfolio, which is tied to, again, the stock market. Another reason to delay might be that you're not willing to take on more risk. So using that portfolio earlier in retirement is less risky than allowing it to grow or decay with the market. It's sort of a bird in the hand versus two in the bush. If you take that portfolio earlier, as long as, granted, Social Security is still viable later in retirement, Social Security is assumably less risky than your market portfolio. Another good reason, maybe one of the better ones to take later, is you expect a longer life expectancy. If you're someone who has a family history of them living into their 90s, maybe even up to 100, you're receiving much more of that income. That higher payment per month is eventually going to supersede the missed income that you didn't take from 62 to 67 or 62 to 70 years old. If you're someone that prefers stable and predictable income, again, waiting for Social Security and taking later will give you a higher stable income later in retirement. And then if you're someone that's relying on Social Security for a large portion of your retirement income, again, waiting and delaying that Social Security later will give you a larger monthly payment, which may be more secure in retirement. So these have been the considerations for whether you should take earlier or take later. I'm not someone that thinks that there's a one fit solution for everybody. I think generally you have to look at what your preferences are and what your situation is and determine, is it better to take earlier or is it better to take later? Of course, it's always a good idea to consult a professional, whether that be a financial advisor or elsewise. But if this has been helpful, please give the video a like, leave a comment down below with any questions that you have, and we'll be making more videos on Social Security in the future as well.